My next patron question is from Trevon, who wants to know if I think DreamWorks Animation would have a more respectable reputation if The Prince of Egypt was their first movie rather than Antz. To be honest, I don't think the studio would have been viewed differently if one movie was released before another. The early period of DreamWorks Animation is an interesting one, as it seemed like Jeffrey Katzenberg had specific goals for the computer animated films versus the hand-drawn ones. The CG movies seemed to be aiming for a satirical and edgy sort of comedy, like he suggested the folks at Pixar do with Toy Story. When Antz and A Bug's Life were released a few weeks from each other, critics stated that Antz was the more adult film, while Bug's Life tended to aim younger, although funnily enough, both involve a quirky loner ant who gets the rest of the colony to stand up against those who seek to control them with force and intimidation. Despite that claim, A Bug's Life does have plenty of adult themes and humor. That movie just approached them in a different way than Antz. Meanwhile, the hand-drawn films, like The Prince of Egypt, were grand historical epics. Two of those, The Prince of Egypt and Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, went for serious realistic feel, while the other two, Road to El Dorado and Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas, were more fantastical and comedic in their storytelling choices. Nonetheless, those four do have a specific identifiable look to them, enough that when I saw the trailer for Road to El Dorado, I immediately connected that it was done by the same studio that produced Prince of Egypt. The interesting thing is that despite Antz opening first, The Prince of Egypt would outgross it domestically and internationally, and it seems to become the more fondly remembered of the two films. While Antz certainly has its fans, it's mostly known as that one animated film Woody Allen was a voice in, and the other computer-animated ant movie of that year. Meanwhile, The Prince of Egypt is often cited by many as their favorite screen version of the story of the Exodus from Egypt, is still generally considered one of DreamWorks' best films, and it even inspired a stage musical. I would argue that The Prince of Egypt sits alongside Chicken Run and Shrek as one of the more popular and highly regarded films of DWA's early period. Speaking of Shrek, if any movie came to define what audiences associate with DreamWorks Animation, it's that movie. People really responded to it and loved its parody of fairy tales in the way it made fun of Disney. It would even become the first winner of the Best Animated Feature Oscar, in addition to receiving a Best Adapted Screenplay nomination, so it had both the admiration of the general public and the film industry. There's a good chance if there were 10 Best Picture nominees back then, like they have now, Shrek would have gotten in there. The immense success of that film is what likely led to DWA choosing to greenlight comedies with a heavy emphasis on pop culture references with some satire thrown in, and people's taste did start to shift towards wanting primarily animated comedies with snappy banter between the characters. Toy Story is what probably got the ball rolling, but then films like Shrek, Monsters Inc., Lilo and Stitch, and Ice Age really cemented that. Meanwhile, Spirit and Sinbad were greeted with a shrug, although it's interesting that DWA would end up making a Spirit show in another movie years later. Nonetheless, when people think of early DreamWorks Animation, Shrek is normally the first film to come to mind, not Antz. Although nowadays there's a strange expectation for the studio to make How to Train Your Dragon every time, and people online seem to get upset when they decide to produce something sillier and lighter like Trolls Next. This seems to ignore that different directors are working on different projects and putting their own particular stamp on them of things they like or are inspired by. The online animation community seems to go from treating DreamWorks like the best studio ever when they do something like The Wild Robot, to treating them as worthless when they come out with The Boss Baby. You'll see comments like, "Oh, those poor animators, why are they making them animate teenage krakens and singing trolls and not the next Fantasia?" Stop treating the filmmakers and animators like your personal entertainment monkeys only there to do your bidding. They don't make a movie that does not appeal to your personal taste as some slight against you. And honestly, DreamWorks has been in the game for so long and has produced so many movies, I don't find myself comparing them anymore when I see a new one. I apply the same rule to Pixar, by the way. Though I should mention only places like Animation Twitter treat DreamWorks this way. The general public probably does not have strong feelings one way or the other and gravitate towards the films that interest them. Their body of work is one that's provided several movies that have entertained viewers, and the beauty of DreamWorks Animation is you never know what you're going to get next. Whether it's telling the story of a Hebrew leading his people out of Egypt, an ogre who hangs out with fairytale characters, or a bee who sues the human race over honey. Thank you for your question, Trevon.